Hi everyone, thank you very much for stopping by and returning to the old world. It's been a few days now since we've had the Warhammer community article, which seems to promise a glimpse into the future. And I know there's been quite a bit of speculation on that, but I thought I'd add my tuppence to the mix. What am I talking about? Well, it is the line you see hopefully on the screen in front of you. This comes from the Warhammer community article about the Arcane Journal for the Wood Elves, but does seem to promise a glimpse into the future, talking about what will happen when the the Arcane Journal for Grand Cathay, I should say, has actually been released, because it's talking about a sequence of books that follows it. It says we will continue to jump around the old world, telling the stories of Westerland and elsewhere, moving back and forward over a period of around a decade. Other places in this article have also talked about how they're trying to intertwine the stories which are being told in the different arcane journals to give a more complete view of the narrative. The quote here ends, "Suffice to say, there's plenty more to come." That alone, I think, is something that's going to be really heartening to fans of Warhammer the Old World. We've all seen loads of naysayers saying it's just a cash grab, we're going to get a few bits and bobs, mostly old models, then Games Workshop, they're going to be shutting up shop, laughing their way to the bank at all the models that people have bought for a game which will only be supported for a very short period of time. This does seem to go against it. It does seem to be there is a developing and emerging plan from Games Workshop to support Warhammer the Old World. So that in itself, really good news. So this brings me, though, to the core question of what are they actually talking about? There's a number of theories around this doing the rounds. So I thought I'd explore some of these and just provide a few of my thoughts. Let's start with option number one, which is another brand new army. It's the Arcane Journal for the forces of Kislev. I think there's quite a lot of stuff you can point to which says this might be a possibility. If we remember back in the early days of Warhammer community bigging up the release or future release of Warhammer the Old World, it was talking about two factions that were brand new and were a tie-in to the Total War Warhammer 3 computer game, Cathay and Kislev. We've seen now that Cathay is definitely coming, which just gives us Kislev to talk about, and we know that work has been done on this particular faction. I think there's more to it than that as well, because if we look at what we know about the story, the narrative around the old world, it's being set in the decades leading up to the Great Chaos Incursion. And Kislev are going to have to play a huge part in the narrative if it moves forward towards that occasion. And even if we look at the situation now, with the unrest in the Chaos Wastes, the increasing number of raids that are going to be happening as we close in on that big momental moment in Warhammer history, you kind of need to be able to field a force of Kislevites in order to make that happen. Games Workshop have also got a history of producing models for Kislev. I think there was a special force in 6th edition which allowed you to take Kislevite forces, and there's more classic models as well for this range. So they had horse archers and winged lancers back when I was a young boy and making my first steps along my Warhammer journey. So if these models still exist, or at least the molds for these models still exist, it does mean that Games Workshop does have that starter for 10. It's got some stuff it can throw at the range, although yes, it will need padding out with quite a few new models, I think, to make a full and complete army. What are the other options? Well, option number 2 is actually we're going to see a series of books for Grand Cathay. If the Arcane Journal is, as is standard, your 46-page book, there's an awful lot of information that's going to have to packed into that. Because, let's face it, all of the other factions, They appear in either the Forces of Fantasy or Ravening Hordes book, which gives you a bit of an introduction to the faction. It gives you the core army list, core magic items, etc. Cathay don't have that. So in 46 pages, they're going to have to introduce a brand new faction, which has had very little coverage in the lore to date. It's going to have to introduce all of the units which make up their normal force. This is going to take up a lot of space, and I can't see how, unless the book is substantially larger than all the other Arcane Journals, they're going to be able to include the scenario, the 2 Armies of Infamy, etc., etc. So the theory going here is that we're going to see Arcane Journal Grand Cathay and effectively a second volume which will contain the rest of the information. I'm not so sure about this. I wonder if actually we'll just see a meatier Arcane Journal. A bit like a launch set almost for it. In the way that they did for the models, where the Bretonnians and the Tomb Kings got bigger launch boxes. I wonder if we'll get a bigger launch book for Cathay. The next theory is the armies of legend. Whether we're going to start see some of those armies which have been condemned really to the history books, at least for now, starting to make an appearance. There's been commentary around how some of the models, as they've been discontinued from Age of Sigmar, have then gone on to make an appearance in Warhammer the Old World. So we saw vast swathes of what were High Elf and Empire models, for example, cut from the Age of Sigmar line quite some time ago, and they are being resurrected for the world that was. This takes us to what's happened more recently. So we know that in 4th edition of Age of Sigmar, in the box, you get Vermintide, aka new sculpts of Skaven. And this gives us all of those classic Skaven sculpts which are being dropped from the line. People are using this as an opportunity to put 2 and 2 together and say, well, maybe that means they're going to get an appearance in the Old World because they can repackage those old models and sell them again with square rather than round bases in order to be used in the Old World. So Arcane Journal, Skaven. I do think this is a little bit of wish listing at this point in time, and I don't think we've got a real indication, as far as I'm aware, that the legend factions are going to start to be supported. Certainly not in the near future. I mention Skaven because there's also people jumping on the bandwagon for ogres. Given their close proximity to Cathay, I can kind of see how that makes sense, and starting to pick up the stories of the migrating tribes as they move to the areas we were familiar with them appearing in 8th edition of Warhammer Fantasy Battle, along with, 7th and 6th, I suppose, as well. If we're going to talk about discontinued models and being transferred across to Warhammer the Old World, then I suppose we also, within this same section, need to talk about the Dark Elves. Dark Elves, obviously, hugely important, hugely popular part of what was Warhammer Fantasy Battles. We've got the great novels around Malus Darkblade, for example, as well, which really helped to bring some colour to this particular faction. 7th, 8th edition of Warhammer Fantasy Battles, they were really strong, very popular as a result, so there's probably quite a few people with armies floating around out there that would be eager to bring them back to the table if they were made into a properly supported army that wasn't in the lower rankings of the game. They're also having a range refresh, and a lot of what was the Dark Elf range is no longer available for Age of Sigmar, to the best of my knowledge. So again, it plays into this same narrative. Overall, though, as I say, I think it is a little bit wish listy. I'm not sure this is necessarily what I would expect, but I'm like, when it comes to predictions, they don't normally do particularly well. The final thing to talk about is campaign books. And this really goes into Games Workshop's desire to drive the narrative, to weave together the bits of story they've already told, to give us something a little bit more comprehensive. Again, looking back at Warhammer Fantasy Battles, we used to get way back when campaign packs. A little pack that had a series of linked games designed for two particular factions. The Grudge of Drung, for example, The Idol of Gork, Tales of Isha. Really interesting little game setups. Now, as well as being good for local campaigns with your mates and maybe adding a bit more information to the narrative, I think these also have a really useful potential when it comes to more regular gameplay or competitive gameplay. Why? Because it will introduce new scenarios. If they were to release a series of campaign books, then I think most of the campaign games will be designed for fun play rather than strict competitive play. But of course, we have seen asymmetric games. They're coming into Warhammer 40,000 as part of the new chapter approved setup, so could be a direction of travel, that aside. If there is at least one game that's balanced around the idea of forces of 2,000 points taking each other on, then I think this will be a great aid to tournament organisers and to people just having a pickup game down the club or at their friendly local gaming store. Why? Because most of the scenarios at the moment, let's face it, you win by taking models off the board from your opponent. There's a little bit more to it than that, but there's not an awful lot. It's kill more, take more banners, and I think scenario play could really make the game a lot more interesting. It will really make us have to think about what armies we're bringing to the table, particularly if we don't know exactly what game we're going to be playing. The more variety there is in scenarios, the more people won't be able to just lean into, this is the best unit, I will take that. They'll have to take 4 units that can do different jobs depending on the potential scenarios they may face. If we look at the Welsh Open, I think this is a really good example of a well-constructed set of scenarios, because taken individually, yes, they very much will favour one faction, one play style over another, but if you put them together as a collective, suddenly you're very good at 1 or 2 of these scenarios and you're really not very good at 2 or 3 of the others. So you need to find a way of being able to compete in every different scenario type, as well as picking up the big wins when you're able to do so. So I think scenarios, I mentioned this in a previous video, really, really going to be useful, and campaign books will give an opportunity for Games Workshop to provide scenarios like that to us. So where do I stand on all of this? I've said I'm not so sure about the legendary factions, but what about the other options? My heart, my head really is leaning towards Kislev. We know that work's been done. We know that work was being done to tie into Warhammer 3 for the computer game. Yes, that didn't really come off as release date, was nowhere near when Warhammer came out, whatever the original intention may have been. But we know there's the potential for molds of old classic units. We know that work's been done with the drawings, etc., that appeared many, many moons ago on Warhammer Community, and that Kislev will be front and centre against the fight against chaos and will play a really important part in the narrative. So yes, as much as my predictions generally suck, that is the donkey I'm going to pin the tail on, and we'll see what happens. However, of course, appreciate everyone's going to have entirely their own views on all of this sort of thing. Do let me know what you think down in the comments below. I hope you've enjoyed the video. I hope you found it interesting / entertaining. If you have, do please consider a like and subscribe. Best way of supporting a small channel such as this one. All that remains for me to say is thank you for listening. I am returned to the old world. Have a great day.